got a lot of people to disappoint.
Hello there friends, first off I want to say thank you for 700 subscribers. I didn't really expect to get that many when I started making videos about RPGs. I kind of expected the subscriber number to go, the other way. Saying this though, I'm going to look like a real silly Billy if I upload this and it's not at 700. The support on those previous videos, however, has made this video possible, so thank you. Well, if you're new here, because D&D Q&A is something that I imagine gets searched quite a bit, let me introduce myself. I'm K.Galaxia, and I've been making a bunch of videos on small thematic things to make tabletop characters a bit more fun to play. The last few videos have been pretty tightly scripted, but this time, as the title suggests that I keep referring to, it's a Q&A with questions sent in by you. So let's just chill out, treat this a bit more conversationally like, and get into it. Okay, so this one's sent in by lovely friendo Chris, and the question is, what's your opinion on changing a spell's aesthetic only, or do you advocate for changing the spell damage for the aesthetic? For example, a mage who wants to use only water magic, if they cast Fireball, would you say it would be blue and watery but still do fire damage, or would you suggest changing it to force damage but keep the dice amount? Did I pick this question first so then I can say that the first point in this video is going to be speak to your DM? Maybe. It does, however, depend on numerous factors, and the first one being your DM. First of all, talk to your DM to see if they are comfortable with you doing this as a homebrew kind of thing, considering some of the spell wording is quite literal, but they might be down to do this. Essentially, I think the other big aspect to keep in mind is how the spell is going to look, and also what condition the water itself might actually be in. For example, if it was like just a large torrent of water just exploding in an area which kind of has no real temperature value to it, then yes, maybe I would say you transform that damage into force but keep the damage dice. But if the water was boiling, I see no way that you should change it from fire damage because you are still inflicting some form of heat damage. I think it's something that could be really cool, but it's entirely dependent on how comfortable people are with playing it. Next up is a question from also very lovely friendo Charlotte, who I am currently in a campaign with. The question reads, do you also get the nerves when roleplaying, especially when a big part of your arc is brought up? And if so, have you any ways of dealing with it? Love the vids as always, bud. First of all, thank you. Second of all, do I get nervous? Yes. Yeah, I get incredibly nervous whenever something comes up regards my character, and sometimes I just get incredibly nervous when it comes to actually role-playing as a character. But I have learned a few things that have actually helped me cope with it. The big first one is pretty, well, obvious, in my opinion. You should be playing with people that you're comfortable with and have a chemistry with. It's quite difficult to go to a table full of people that you don't know and start role-playing at because, well, you don't know these people. I mean, they're not going to laugh at you, at least they shouldn't. If they do, I'll punch them in the mouth, but being with people you actually know is infinitely better. Outside of that, I try to get a feel for my character as a person. I think about different situations and how they might actually react in said situation. Admittedly, a lot of the situations I think of are quite pessimistic, but hey, I play a warlock. One of the weirdest ways you can ground yourself as a character is to wear some shoes that you think your character might actually wear. I recognise that sounds entirely wild and maybe a bit weird, and if I'm honest, it's potentially a bit placebic, but it works for me, so that's something I do. As well as that, there's also listening to character playlists to help you get into the mood for playing your character, because music is a pretty darn great motivator. Regards having nerves whilst you're currently playing through your arc though, I don't really have a means to cope with that, because I think realistically there is no real means. You're always going to be a bit nervous because it's something that's incredibly personal to your character, and you want the best possible outcome for them. So you are naturally going to be a bit nervous because, I mean, it's like it's your baby, and I mean, sometimes your baby is a tiefling in their late 20s. I recognise this sounds kinda cop-outy, but I mean, I think it's just an intrinsic thing of D&D. There's always going to be points where you are nervous, and the only real way you can combat it is just by doing it. Just go through the arc, and you gotta see how it goes. It might go in your favour, it might not, but at the end of the day, like, the best way to get through those nerves is just to do it. Next up is lovely friendo of a channel and comrade of long ass comments, KT, with fluff stuff. Artifib, sir. Yeah, it's either that or Artificer. It's a constant ongoing war that I don't really care about. Both are cool as far as I'm concerned. It's nothing like GIF or GIF. It's not GIF. They're not called graphics. Using gadgets had me listening. That in the context of magic makes me think of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Steampunk tinkerers building magic crystals into their machines to make floaty glowy coolness. Am I thinking about the right thing here? Well, yeah, that's a thing you can do. Think realistically though, you can do whatever you want with Artificer magic. I see it as gadgetry, but if you see it as pure magic, then you go ahead. And now on to the big question. So I've always been under the impression that you and the people you play with generally play together as a team. But would it be possible for one player or more to take on the role of an antagonist? And if yes, how would that look like and how would you do that? Okay, so antagonists or people with different agendas within the player group is certainly something that can happen, and it is something that can be really quite taxing to both the players and the DM. So playing a character with a different agenda who may well be an antagonist is something that can definitely come with the territory of certain classes, namely warlocks, due to the fact they get their magic from a patron, and the patron may ask them to do something which goes against the grain of the party. There are even some status effects which will make you turn against your party. Playing an actual active antagonist though, like maybe playing as a spy for an enemy empire or something like that, is certainly something you can do, but before you even plan to go ahead with something like that, you need to talk to your DM. It's a lot of stress on them and it's a lot of stress on you, because you need to be very open to the fact that you are an antagonist within this group, so you need to consider how open you're going to be. You have to be good at lying and bluffing. It is something you can do, but it is something that will be pretty taxing to do. And my main piece of advice if you're going to do that is make your backup character whilst you're making your actual character. As I've said constantly throughout this point, it's a huge strain on both you and your DM, and if your DM is cool with it and you're cool with it and you're willing to take on this admittedly very stressful task, then it can lead to some really cool storytelling moments. But like I've said throughout this point, do keep in mind that it is stressful as fuck. Next up is a question from lovely friendo Sticky Hunter. Where do you start as a DM? You tell me. You're one of my DMs. This is a really good and really difficult question because there's so many variables, and my experience with DMing has actually been not very good. This was quite a few years back, but I DM'd for a group of people who I ended up only DMing 2 sessions for because the group chemistry was just really poisonous. So I'd say point number 1 is just make sure you don't have a poisonous group. In terms of the adventure you actually want to put people onto though, the main things I would say is you should plan your setting and the first few beats, areas and the themes that your adventure might actually cover. Another thing I would say is don't be too afraid to guide your players into places. I know railroading can kinda suck, but at the same time, being a DM, a lot of the time it's like herding cats. And I can attest to that because I have both tried to herd the cats and been the cat myself. This, however, is actually a question that I plan to cover in a video, and it's going to be a bit different from my other videos. I'm sorry that my answer here isn't really that strong, but it's mainly because my experiences as the DM are pretty poor. So I think you deserve an actual proper answer and a proper video at some point. This one is from lovely friendo Cage41, who says, I'll toss in some questions. Thank you. I hope I didn't mispronounce your username. Number 1. For newer players, what's a good way to develop creativity as far as using skills and magic in certain situations? Okay, so I fear this might sound kinda cop-outy, but this is very much the case. Experimentation. If you think you have a skill or spell in a situation that you think it might help out in, then describe how you're going to do it or how you're going to cast that spell to the DM and see if they'll let you do it. They might tell you that it's completely impossible, or they might tell you to roll for it and you might succeed or you might fail, even if you roll high. Such is the adventurer's lot in life. The best way to see if stuff actually works is to just do it, and if it doesn't, then maybe that's a lesson learned. Basically, don't be afraid of potential failure. Is there a good rule of thumb as far as how much detail a DM should put into their world? Is it worth it to plan out how everything should look just in case a player asks? Now, as I answered before, I have only DM'd twice, so I'm not the most clued in on this, but I'll try and give you a hand. So the way I did it was to have a general plan for locations, key people in said locations, the aesthetic, and the state that the place is in. At first, think about things that your characters would only see at face value, and then go a little deeper in case they decide to investigate into it. That being said though, don't feel the need to go absolutely hog wild in terms of detail. If your party enters a tavern, you don't need to know absolutely everybody's name in the tavern. And if someone tries to say, I want to find out what this person's name is, then don't be afraid to improvise. Most of these characters are probably going to be throwaway anyway. Essentially, plan out the important stuff, and if you want to plan out even further, then feel free to, but don't break yourself for it. You don't want to be writing pages and pages of notes just for them never to come up. And number 3, how important do you find armor to be across the different classes? Obviously, adventurous characters getting into scuffles with dangerous monsters will need protection, but does every class need to be well kitted out, or can some be a little more fashion orientated? Sorry if these questions have been covered before, I'm still new to D&D for the most part and I've yet to watch all your videos. Working on it though. So first off, thank you for the support. It's really nice that you're enjoying these videos and I hope you enjoyed the rest of them. So this is something I actually kind of made a video on, but I'm happy to give a bit more of a bite-sized answer here. Essentially, if you're going to be playing a character who is kitted out in armor, then yes, the armor is going to be important, but that doesn't mean you can't make armor fashion. One of my favourite examples of this is Dragon Age Inquisition, in the respect that different characters can wear the same suit of armour, but it might look different per character and it'd be more in fitting with their character aesthetic. Some characters might look a lot more heavily armoured, for example, and just be focused more primarily on the armour, whilst other characters might have some different outerwear around it, like maybe a scarf. What's also important to note is how the armour itself might actually look. That in itself may well be fashion. You might have a paladin who shines the armour every single day. You might have a mercenary who just sort of has it as it is. For another example with my character Hiref, his armour was a chain shirt originally, but on top of that chain shirt he also had tattered cloaks from his time in Damara after he'd been possessed, because these are still elements of his old life that meant quite a lot to him, so he wears them on top of the armour. So the armour is still there, it's just unique looking to him. It's also mainly because I took a lot of inspiration from Striga fashion, because Striga fashion is pretty fucking dope. And the last questions are from lovely friendo and great comrade Nola. Number 1, are there any classes and subclasses that you love? I have far too many favourites. Like, there are lots of classes and subclasses that I absolutely adore. Realistically though, most of my favourite subclasses actually come from the book Xanathar's Guide to Everything. For example, I'm playing as a Hexblade at the moment, which are from Xanathar's Guide, and Hexblades are just cool, man. I'd say the subclass that I have the absolute most love for, though, is probably the Horizon Walker. I think thematically, they are one of the coolest subclasses out there. It's just a real shame that they're tied to the Ranger, which is arguably the worst class. And question number 2 from this, how do you create a synergy between two classes and their spells and abilities? This is actually a really cool question, and I haven't really thought about this before because I've not really looked at multiclassing, although I probably really should. So my first big point would be to look for guides regards multiclassing with the classes you want to do this with. I'm not the biggest fan of min-maxing, but at the same time I can understand frustrations when you feel you might be getting the worst of both worlds. I remember you mentioning that your character Dandelion, who I absolutely adore by the way, is a sorcerer and a bard. Now this, to me, is a really fucking cool combination. The coolest thing to me is that you could pair up some of the bard's spells with a sorcerer's metamagic, depending on how you've leveled, meaning you could potentially pull off some pretty spicy stuff. One of the biggest hurdles you might face as a player, however, especially early on when you're multiclassing, is that you might feel like you're not contributing enough, or that you're not super powerful. The truth is, multiclassing can be a long burn, but it can also be fully worth it. Just look at the spells and abilities that best suit you and would best work together, stick with them, and utilise them as best you can with some clever thinking. The synergy might take time, but just know that you're not useless. Okay, so thank you for giving me your questions. I hope I've answered them in a format that you find either informative or at the very least entertaining. This has been quite different, and I'm still kind of getting used to it. It's the entire nervous thing, you know? But I had fun doing this, so if you have any questions you want to drop after seeing this, then please do feel free to put them down in the comments below. I think it'd be really fun to do something like this again. But most of all, I hope you've enjoyed your time here. I apologise if my voice is sounding a little hoarse and my hair's a little wild. Such are the times we live in. But hey ho, if you enjoyed this, a like would be lovely, but most of all, I just hope you're all okay right now. Look after yourself, and I'll see you next time.